It was a quiet evening in the small neighborhood. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the streets were bathed in a soft orange glow. Officer Daniels had just finished his last round of patrol for the night. The streets were mostly empty, except for the occasional car passing by. He had been a cop for over 10 years, and he had learned to appreciate the calmness of the night shift. But tonight, something felt different. He was driving down the street when he heard it, soft, distant crying. At first, he thought it was the wind or maybe a cat. But then, the sound grew louder, closer. His hand instinctively gripped the steering wheel as he slowed down, trying to pinpoint where the cry was coming from. He looked to his right, and that's when he saw him. A small boy, no older than 6 or 7, standing alone under the flickering streetlight. His clothes were worn, and his shoes were too big for his small feet. The boy's face was streaked with tears, his eyes wide and fearful. Officer Daniels pulled over and stepped out of his car, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached the child. "Hey, little guy," he called gently, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring. "Are you okay?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he took one shaky step toward Officer Daniels, his little legs wobbly as if they had been running for a while. Before Officer Daniels could say anything else, the boy rushed into his arms, clinging to him tightly. "Please, please help." The boy sobbed into Officer Daniels' uniform. His tiny body shook with fear, and his sobs echoed through the empty street. "She's not waking up. I don't know what to do. Please, help her." The words hit Officer Daniels hard. He crouched down to the boy's level, trying to see his face. "Who's not waking up, buddy?" he asked softly, his heart racing. "Where's your mom or dad?" The boy lifted his head, his tear-streaked face showing confusion and fear. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, his voice trembling. "It's my sister, Tia. She's not waking up. Please, she needs help." Officer Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the boy's words felt urgent, like a cry for help that couldn't be ignored. "Where is she?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The boy glanced around nervously, his eyes darting down the street. "The blue house, the one with the broken window," he whispered. Without another word, Officer Daniels gently took the boy's hand. "We're going to help her, okay?" he said, trying to reassure him. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with hope, but the fear still lingered in his gaze. Together, they walked down the street, the boy leading the way. The silence between them was heavy, and Officer Daniels could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He didn't know what was waiting at the blue house, but the boy's tears were enough to tell him that something was wrong. As they reached the house, the boy stopped in front of the door and looked up at Officer Daniels. His face was pale, and his lips trembled. "Please don't let her be gone," he whispered, almost to himself. Officer Daniels placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "Stay here," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I'll go inside and make sure everything's okay." The boy nodded and stepped back, but he didn't let go of Officer Daniels' hand. With a deep breath, Officer Daniels approached the door. It was slightly ajar, and the smell of stale air hit him immediately. He pushed the door open with caution, his eyes scanning the dark interior. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. There was no sign of movement, and the only sound was the creaking of the floorboards under his boots. The faint glow from the streetlights outside barely illuminated the dim hallway. Officer Daniels called out softly, but there was no response. The boy's voice echoed in his mind. "She's not waking up." The words sent a shiver through him. He walked further into the house, his flashlight illuminating the walls. In the back, he noticed a door slightly open. The smell in the air grew heavier, and he knew something wasn't right. He pushed the door open slowly. There, lying on the bed, was a young woman, Tia. She was motionless, her skin pale. Her hair was messy, and there were signs of bruising on her arms. Officer Daniels rushed to her side, kneeling down beside the bed. He placed 2 fingers on her wrist, checking for a pulse. Nothing. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was something far worse. He quickly pulled out his radio and called for backup. Unit 7 to dispatch. I need an ambulance, ASAP. I have an unconscious female, possible overdose or worse, at the Blue House on Maple Street. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of the boy's soft crying from the doorway. Officer Daniels turned, his eyes meeting the boy's. The fear in the child's face was unmistakable. He wasn't sure what had happened inside this house, but he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The sound of sirens pierced the silence of the night as Officer Daniels stood by the doorway, his heart heavy with a growing sense of dread. The boy, no older than 7, still clung to him, his tiny hand shaking. His sobs echoed in the dark, desperate and afraid. Officer Daniels didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. Tia needed help, and she needed it fast. Within moments, the wail of approaching emergency vehicles grew louder. The boy pulled at Daniel's sleeve, his voice a faint whisper. Is she going to be okay? His eyes were wide with fear, and his voice quivered with an emotion far beyond his years. Daniels crouched down to meet his eyes, his own heart aching. We're going to do everything we can, okay? He said softly, trying to soothe him. You did the right thing by coming to me. We'll make sure she gets the help she needs. The boy nodded, but his face remained troubled, the weight of the situation pressing on him. Within seconds, paramedics stormed through the front door, their presence filling the small house. Daniel stepped aside as they moved quickly toward the bed, where Tia lay motionless. The room was filled with the bustle of medical equipment and hurried voices, but amid the chaos, Daniels kept his focus on the child who still stood frozen in the hallway, watching everything unfold. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, guiding him into the living room. Let's step back for a moment, okay? He said gently, his voice calm but firm. The boy didn't answer. He simply nodded, his eyes glued to the paramedics working on Tia. The room was tense as the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Daniels, too, couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene in the bedroom, where the paramedics fought to revive the young woman. She's still not responding, one of the paramedics muttered under his breath, his voice edged with concern. Daniel's mind raced. He glanced down at the boy, still standing silently by his side. Who was this woman? And why did the boy seem so familiar with the house? Why was he here alone, with his sister in this condition? He was about to ask the boy another question when the shrill beep of a defibrillator cut through the air, followed by another, deeper, desperate sound. The paramedics were still working feverishly, trying to resuscitate Tia. Come on, one paramedic whispered under his breath. Come on, stay with us. Daniel's heart sank as the seconds ticked by. Time was running out, and no one could afford to wait much longer. He pulled out his phone and quickly dialed his precinct. Daniel's here, he said, his voice tight. I need a full investigation team. We might be dealing with more than just a medical emergency here. Get the detectives down here, ASAP. Something's not right. He hung up the phone, but his mind continued to race. He turned back to the boy, who was staring at the paramedics working desperately on Tia. Do you know what happened to your sister? Daniels asked quietly, crouching down to the boy's level. How did she end up like this? The boy's eyes widened, and he quickly glanced over his shoulder at the bedroom, as if he was afraid to speak too loudly. He lowered his voice to a whisper. I don't know. She just wasn't waking up. I tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't move. I was scared. Daniel studied the boy's face, trying to understand. The fear in his eyes was real, but something about the boy's words felt different. There was a sense of confusion and panic, but no answers. Has your sister been feeling sick lately? Or anything strange going on? The boy shook his head rapidly, his small body trembling. No, she was fine. She was just sleeping, and I couldn't wake her up. I don't know what happened. Daniel's mind was spinning. He didn't know what to believe, but the boy's account didn't add up. He had to get more answers, and fast. A tense silence settled between them. The boy's head was now bowed, his small hands clenched tightly. Daniels could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He needed to find out who was responsible for what happened here, and why the boy was left alone in this dangerous situation. In the bedroom, the paramedics had managed to stabilize Tia, but she was still unconscious. The flashing lights of the ambulances illuminated the room in a haunting, rhythmic glow, casting long shadows on the walls. Daniels knew the worst wasn't over. He had to find out if this was an accident or something far worse. One of the paramedics walked over to him, his face grim. "She's alive for now," he said quietly, "but we need to get her to the hospital immediately." Daniels nodded. "I'll take care of things here. You just focus on getting her to safety." He turned back to the boy, who was still clutching his arm. "We're going to get you and your sister some help," Daniel said softly. "Everything is going to be okay." But even as he spoke those words, a nagging doubt settled in his mind. This wasn't just another case. There was something darker lurking beneath the surface, and he could feel it in his gut. What had really happened in this house? And why had the boy been so desperate to save his sister? As the paramedics loaded Tia into the ambulance, Daniel stood still, his mind racing. He could hear the sound of the sirens fading into the distance, but the weight of what he had just witnessed stayed with him. There was no going back now. He had to figure out what had really happened, and who was responsible for leaving a child alone in such a terrifying situation. The day after the emergency, Officer Daniels sat in his office, staring at the case file in front of him. It had been hours since he left the scene, but his mind was still racing. The boy, the scene, the strange quietness of the entire situation. It was all too much. Something didn't add up, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He leaned back in his chair, trying to piece things together. The paramedics had transported Tia to the hospital, but her condition was still critical. She hadn't woken up, and the doctors weren't sure if she would make it. That's when Daniels had made the decision to dig deeper into the case. He needed answers, and the first place to start was with the boy. The boy, James, had been placed into temporary care while his sister was being treated. Daniels had learned that their mother had passed away years ago, leaving Tia to take care of James. The two siblings had been through a lot, growing up in foster care before finally finding each other and building a life together. But Daniels knew something was off about the whole situation. Why was James alone with his sister that night? Where was the person supposed to be looking after them? Daniels picked up his phone and called the foster care agency. He needed to find out everything they could about Tia and James' background. After a few minutes of waiting, a woman's voice came through the line. "Detective Daniels," she asked. "I've been briefed on the situation. What do you need from me?" "I need all the information you have on the two of them, especially on Tia," Daniels said, his voice firm. "Something doesn't feel right about this case." The woman hesitated. "Well, they were both great kids. Tia, especially, she was a fighter. But there was one thing I should mention. A few months ago, we had some concerns. She had started showing signs of stress. Unusual behavior, but we thought it was just the stress of being a guardian to James. No one thought it was serious enough to intervene." Daniels furrowed his brows. "What kind of behavior?" "She became withdrawn. She stopped coming to her meetings with her counselor. And she started acting strangely around other people, especially when someone asked about her brother. She seemed protective, almost to the point of paranoia." Daniels jotted down some notes. That was the first clue he had been looking for. But there was more to uncover. A few hours later, Daniels met with the hospital staff to check on Tia's condition. They had just finished running some tests when one of the doctors came to speak with him. "We've been monitoring Tia closely," the doctor said, "but we found something strange. We suspect foul play. We think someone may have drugged her." Daniel's stomach churned. "What are you saying?" "Someone tried to kill her. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. We're still running tests, but it's possible she was poisoned. We found traces of a substance in her system, something that would put her into a deep sleep but wouldn't show up in typical toxicology reports. Daniel's mind raced as he processed the information. The boy had said his sister wasn't waking up. Could this be the reason why? Could someone have targeted Tia? The doctor continued. We don't know how it was administered, but we're looking into the possibility of it being an external factor. Perhaps something she drank or ate. Daniels felt a wave of frustration. If someone had been trying to hurt Tia, he needed to know who and why. He made a mental note to check into the people Tia had interacted with recently. Her sudden withdrawal, the strange behavior, and now this, it was starting to feel like more than just a coincidence. The next day, Daniels visited James at the foster home. The boy was still shaken, but he was calmer now. He sat on the edge of a chair, his hands fidgeting as he nervously avoided eye contact. James, Daniels began softly, I need to know more about what happened last night. Why were you alone with your sister? And did she mention anything unusual to you in the days before? The boy hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. I don't know, officer. I don't know. She kept telling me not to tell anyone, but she said someone was trying to hurt her. She said they wanted to take me away from her. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Who, James? Who was she afraid of? James shook his head, his eyes brimming with tears. She wouldn't tell me. She just kept saying I had to stay quiet. I didn't understand it. But last night, I heard someone outside the window. I don't know who it was, but she looked scared. And then she told me to run for help. I did what she told me. I ran to you. Daniels was stunned. Someone was outside her window. James nodded. I swear, officer, I didn't make it up. Daniels stood there for a moment, piecing together the puzzle in his mind. Someone had been watching Tia. Someone had been threatening her. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but he knew he wasn't anywhere close to solving the case yet. I believe you, James, Daniels said quietly, placing a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. As Daniels left the foster home, a sense of determination washed over him. There were answers to find, and he would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. Someone had hurt Tia, and now, with James' words, Daniels had the key to unlocking the mystery. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. Detective Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that the answers to this case were just out of reach, taunting him, slipping through his fingers like sand. The boy's words haunted him. Someone had been watching Tia, and Tia had been afraid. The more he thought about it, the more questions piled up. Who was threatening Tia? Why? And what did it have to do with her brother James? He knew he had to find answers quickly. Tia was still unconscious in the hospital, and her condition remained critical. Every minute she stayed in that state was a minute closer to the truth fading away. Daniels had to act fast, so he started by revisiting the crime scene, the apartment where the incident had occurred. As he arrived at the apartment complex, Daniels felt the weight of the case pressing on him. The air felt thick with uncertainty, and the noise of the city seemed distant, as though it had no connection to the struggle unfolding here. He stepped into the building and took the elevator up to the floor where Tia and James had been living. The apartment was modest, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It wasn't much, but it had been their home, a place where they had found some semblance of stability. Daniels couldn't help but think about the life they had built in this small space, a life filled with hardship, but also moments of love and care. Now, everything had been turned upside down, and the questions that had no answers were gnawing at him. The apartment door was slightly ajar, a clear sign that the crime scene investigators had already gone through the place. But there was still something Daniels needed to check, something he couldn't ignore. He pushed the door open further and walked inside. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. It looked like an ordinary living space. Furniture, dishes in the sink, a few pictures on the walls. But Daniel's eyes were drawn to a small desk in the corner of the room. On it sat a few scattered papers, bills, receipts, and a small notebook. He approached the desk carefully, knowing that every detail could be significant. He picked up the notebook and flipped through the pages. It was filled with Tia's handwriting, thoughts, observations, and notes about everyday life. But as he skimmed through the pages, one entry caught his attention. It wasn't long, just a simple line that seemed out of place. "They're watching us. I don't know who, but I can't keep running. I'm scared for James." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the answer he had been searching for. Tia had known she was being watched. She had been afraid for her brother. But what did it mean? Who was threatening them? And why had she been so scared? Daniels carefully placed the notebook back on the desk and pulled out his phone. He needed to get this information to the right people. There was no time to waste. The clock was ticking, and Tia's life hung in the balance. He dialed the number for his partner, Detective Jenna Holt. "Jenna, I need you to pull the surveillance footage from the building. I think we've missed something. I'll send you the address, and I want you to check the footage from the past few days. There has to be something we're overlooking." Jenna's voice crackled through the line. "On it. I'll get the footage ASAP. But what's going on, Daniels?" "I think Tia was trying to protect James from something," Daniels said, his voice low. "She knew someone was watching them. And I think that someone might be involved in whatever happened last night." Jenna didn't respond immediately. She was processing the information. "Got it. I'll look into it." Meanwhile, back at the hospital, James sat by his sister's side, holding her hand, his small fingers curled around hers. He had been waiting for hours for Tia to wake up. The doctors weren't sure if she would ever regain consciousness, but James couldn't bear the thought of losing her. She was his only family, his protector, and his best friend. Without her, he didn't know what he would do. As he sat there, deep in thought, a nurse walked in. She was carrying a small folder with Tia's medical records. "James, we're running some tests, but I wanted to talk to you about something important," the nurse said softly, sitting down beside him. James looked up at her, his eyes filled with concern. "What's wrong? Is she going to be okay?" The nurse smiled gently. "We're doing everything we can, but we need you to answer a few questions, okay? It's about your sister." James nodded. "We know that your sister has had some troubles in the past, right? We found something in her medical history that could help us understand what's going on. We need to know if she ever mentioned anything about someone harming her, any specific threats or worries." James hesitated. He thought about his sister's cryptic words, her warnings to him. He thought about how protective she had always been of him. And then he thought about that night, how she had been so scared, telling him to run for help. "Yeah," James said finally, his voice trembling. "She told me someone was after us. She said they wanted to take me away from her. And she said I couldn't tell anyone." The nurse looked at James with concern. "Do you know who she was talking about?" James shook his head, his small voice barely a whisper. "No, she never told me who it was. But she was scared." The nurse patted his hand gently. "It's okay, James. You've done the right thing by telling us. We're going to help her. And we'll figure out who's behind this." Back at the precinct, Daniels was pacing back and forth, waiting for Jenna to get back with the footage. The mystery was deepening by the minute, and he needed answers. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but there were still gaps, so many unanswered questions. He had to find out who was threatening Tia and why. And then, just as he was about to give up and check in with Jenna, his phone rang. It was Jenna. "Daniels," she said, her voice tense. "I've got something." "You said." Daniels felt his pulse quicken as he answered the phone. His mind raced with the possibility of what Jenna might have found. "What's the update? Did you find something?" Jenna's voice was steady but tinged with urgency. "You were right. I checked the footage from the building. There's something strange. There was a man, someone I don't think we've considered before. He was lurking around the complex in the days leading up to the incident. He didn't live there, and he wasn't supposed to be there. He had his face covered most of the time, but I sent the footage to forensics to do a deeper analysis. But there's one thing I can tell you now. He was watching them. Daniels clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to rush out the door. Where is he now? Do we have a name? Jenna paused. Not yet, but I'm working on it. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Daniels hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. Everything was about to change. He had a sense of what was happening now. This wasn't just some random act of violence. Someone had been targeting Tia and James, and whatever the reason, it was personal. The threat wasn't over. The hunt was far from finished. Back at the hospital, James was starting to feel the weight of everything crashing down on him. His sister was still unconscious, and he had no idea when, or if, she would wake up. His world felt like it was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. But the nurse had said they were doing everything they could. He just had to trust them. James tried to distract himself by watching cartoons on the small TV in the corner of the room, but nothing could take his mind off of Tia. He glanced at the door every time it opened, hoping to see someone come in with good news. He knew there was something he hadn't told anyone yet, a detail about the night everything had gone wrong. He had been too scared to mention it before, but he knew now it was important. He had to tell someone. Just then, Daniels arrived at the hospital, his face set with determination. He had a sinking feeling that everything was about to unravel, but he needed to speak to James. The boy might have information that could finally crack the case wide open. Daniels approached the nurse at the front desk. "Where's James? I need to speak with him." The nurse looked up, her face softening. "He's in his sister's room. I'm afraid he's been through a lot, Detective. He's just a child." "I know. I need to talk to him, though," Daniels replied, his voice firm. "It's important." The nurse nodded and led him down the hallway to Tia's room. When Daniels stepped inside, he saw James sitting by his sister's bedside. The boy looked up, his eyes red from crying. Daniels could see the weight of the world in the small boy's face. He took a step forward, his voice calm but serious. "James, I need to ask you something. It's really important. Do you remember anything else from that night? Anything that might help us figure out what happened?" James looked at him, biting his lip nervously. He hesitated for a long moment, then finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "There was someone else, before the man in the mask. Tia said she saw someone at the door that night. She said it was someone she knew, someone who had been following us." Daniels leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Do you know who it was? Did she say anything else?" James nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes. "She didn't say their name, but she said it was someone she trusted, someone who made her feel safe. But then, she said that person changed. They weren't the same anymore." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Who was it, James? Was it someone close to you?" James wiped his eyes, sniffling. "I don't know. But Tia was scared. She was really scared of them." Daniel stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. A trusted person. Someone close to them. Someone who had betrayed them. As Daniels left the hospital room, he could feel the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. This wasn't random. Whoever had been after Tia and James wasn't a stranger. They had been close to the family, someone who had gained their trust before everything went wrong. But what had happened to make them turn on them? He needed to find out who this person was, and fast. The next few hours were a blur. Daniels and his team worked tirelessly, sifting through every lead, every possible connection. They re-interviewed neighbors, checked phone records, and dug through everything they could find related to Tia and James' lives. But one thing was clear: someone in their inner circle had betrayed them. And then, just as Daniels was about to give up, his phone rang. It was Jenna again. "Daniels, I got something." I've tracked down the person from the footage. It's a man named Greg Harris. He's a former associate of Tia's mother. And there's more. Harris was involved in a serious criminal case a few years ago. It looks like he's been watching Tia and James for a while. Daniel's stomach dropped. This was the break he had been waiting for. The person responsible for everything was someone they knew, someone from their past. I need everything on Harris. Now, Daniels ordered. He had a feeling the truth was about to hit hard. Daniels rushed back to his car, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy on his mind. Greg Harris, a name that had been buried in the past, now resurfacing with a dark intent. He'd been watching Tia and James, someone close enough to be trusted by their family. But what had happened all those years ago? What connection did Harris have with them? His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he sped through the streets, heading toward the address Jenna had given him. This was no longer just a case of a random attack. It was personal. And Daniels knew that whatever secrets Harris was hiding would tear apart everything Tia and James thought they knew about their past. As Daniels pulled up to an old, dilapidated house on the outskirts of the city, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The house looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows and overgrown weeds creeping up the front steps. No one had lived here for years, yet somehow it was the very place where Harris had chosen to lurk. He got out of the car, his footsteps echoing on the cracked sidewalk. The air was thick with tension. Daniels had learned long ago to trust his gut, and right now, it was telling him that he was about to uncover something far darker than he could have imagined. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The silence was unsettling, so he knocked again, this time harder. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a man with unkempt hair and tired eyes. His face was gaunt, and he looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "What do you want?" Greg Harris' voice was rough, defensive. Daniels didn't waste any time. "We need to talk, Harris, about Tia and James." Harris' eyes flickered with recognition and fear. He stepped back, glancing nervously over his shoulder, then back to Daniels. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniels stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation. He could see the disarray inside the house. Papers scattered across the floor, empty beer bottles lining the tables, and a few photographs pinned to the walls. In the center of the living room, a photo of Tia and her mother hung on the wall, a picture of happier times. "I think you do," Daniels said firmly. "We have reason to believe you've been watching Tia and her brother. You know something about what happened to them." Harris took a step back, rubbing his forehead as if trying to shake off the tension building inside him. "You don't understand. I was just trying to protect them." "Protect them?" Daniels raised an eyebrow. "From what? What were you really doing, Harris?" Greg Harris sank into a worn-out chair, his hands trembling. He looked defeated, like a man who had long ago given up on trying to keep his secrets hidden. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't want this to happen." Daniels remained silent, watching him closely. He knew that the longer Harris talked, the more likely he was to reveal the truth. He waited. "I used to work for their mother," Harris muttered. "She was in a bad situation back then, a dangerous one. And I promised her I'd keep them safe." Daniel's brow furrowed. "But why did you start following them? Why now? They haven't heard from you in years." Harris' eyes glazed over with a mix of guilt and sorrow. "It's not what you think. After their mother passed away, I stayed away. I thought it was the best thing to do. But then I started seeing things. I thought I saw someone following them, watching their every move. I thought it was some kind of revenge from the past. And that's when I decided to start keeping an eye on them. But I didn't mean for things to get out of control. I swear, I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Daniels could feel the weight of Harris' words sinking in. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about fear. Fear that someone from the past was coming after them. Someone who had unfinished business with their family. "But you didn't tell anyone. You didn't go to the police," Daniels pointed out. "You thought you could handle it yourself." Harris nodded, his voice cracking with regret. I was scared. I didn't know who to trust. I thought if I could keep them safe on my own, no one would ever find out. But then things started happening. Strange things. People started showing up around them. It got worse and worse. Daniels felt the tension building. Who showed up, Harris? Who's after them? Harris shook his head desperately, as though the name he was about to say would seal his fate. I don't know. I never got a good look at their faces, but I know they were connected to the same people from the past. The ones who hurt their mother. They're still out there. And now I've made things worse. Daniels clenched his fists, frustration rising within him. Harris knew more than he was letting on, but he wasn't giving up the full story. Not yet. You need to tell me everything, Harris. Every single detail. Lives are at stake. Harris took a deep breath, his eyes closing in pain. I can't. I don't have the answers you're looking for, but if you want to help them, you need to stop searching for me. There are people out there who will do anything to keep their secrets buried. And if you keep digging, they'll come after you too. Daniels could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The danger was real. This was bigger than just one man. It was part of something much larger, something that had been hidden for years. And now, the truth was beginning to surface, one painful piece at a time. As Daniels left the house, he knew the path ahead was even more uncertain than before. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just about Tia and James. It was about exposing a secret that had been buried in the shadows for far too long. And no matter the cost, Daniels was determined to uncover the truth. The truth was starting to unravel, but Daniels knew that each new discovery only brought more questions. The more he dug into the past, the deeper the hole became, and the more dangerous things were getting. Harris' warnings echoed in his mind as he sat in his car, parked outside a rundown diner, staring at the piece of paper that Jenna had given him earlier. It was an address, an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, the last place anyone would think to look. Daniels knew he had to go. There was something at that location, something that could change everything. He glanced at his phone. No new messages. He hadn't told Jenna where he was going. He couldn't risk putting her in any more danger. Taya and James were his priority now. He couldn't afford to fail them. As he started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, his mind raced. What had Harris meant by people from the past? Who were these dangerous individuals who were watching Tia and James? Was there more to their mother's death than anyone realized? He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. Someone was trying to silence the truth, and they would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. The warehouse loomed in front of him, dark and imposing against the night sky. The flickering streetlights barely illuminated the cracked concrete and overgrown weeds around it. It was a place that screamed danger. Daniel stepped out of the car, his hand instinctively resting on the gun at his side. He couldn't afford to be unprepared. He had no idea who or what he was about to face. The door to the warehouse was ajar, creaking on its hinges as Daniels pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He reached for his flashlight and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness and revealing rows of old crates and scattered equipment. This place had been abandoned for years, or at least, that's what it appeared to be. But Daniels knew better. He wasn't here by accident. His heart began to race as he moved deeper into the warehouse. His instincts were telling him that he was close. He needed to find whatever it was that had been hidden here, something that would explain everything. The people watching Tia and James, Harriet's strange behavior, the vague threats, and the disturbing sense of danger that had been following him all along. And then, as he rounded a corner, he saw it. A table covered with old papers and photographs. The kind of evidence he had been searching for. But as his flashlight illuminated the contents of the table, he froze. There in front of him was a photograph of Tia and James. But this wasn't just any photo. It was a photo from years ago. The same one Harris had kept in his house. But there was something different about it now. A red circle had been drawn around their faces in bright marker. Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about surveillance or protection. This was a message, a threat. As he leaned closer to inspect the photograph, the sudden sound of a door slamming behind him made his heart skip a beat. Daniels spun around, hand reaching for his weapon. But it was too late. A shadow moved quickly toward him. And before he could react, a sharp pain exploded in his side. He gasped and staggered back, his vision blurring for a moment. Blood soaked his shirt as he struggled to stay on his feet. Someone was behind him. Someone who had been waiting for this moment. But who? A voice echoed from the shadows, cool and collected. "I told you to stay away." Daniels turned, trying to steady himself, but his vision was fading. The figure stepped into the light. A man in a dark suit, his face partially obscured by a mask. He was tall, imposing, and his presence seemed to fill the entire warehouse. "Who are you?" Daniels gasped, struggling to keep his focus. The man didn't answer immediately. He took a step closer, studying Daniels with cold, calculating eyes. "I'm someone who knows how far you're willing to go to uncover the truth. But there are some things better left buried." Daniels tried to steady his breath, clutching at his wound. "You're the one behind this. All of it. The threats, the people watching Tia and James." The man's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Not just me. There's a bigger game at play here. A game that's been going on for far longer than you realize. And now you've played your part. But this is where it ends." Daniels gritted his teeth. He couldn't give up now. He was so close to the truth. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "You can't stop me. I will expose everything." The man's expression darkened, and he stepped forward, raising a gun. "You don't get it, do you? There's no stopping us now. No one is going to believe you." Daniel's mind raced. He had to act fast. The moment of truth was here. With a surge of adrenaline, he lunged forward, knocking the gun from the man's hand. The two of them struggled, the fight chaotic and desperate. In the scuffle, Daniels managed to grab the man by the collar, pulling him into a metal beam, knocking him unconscious. Gasping for breath, Daniels took a few steps back, clutching his side, blood staining his shirt. He needed to call for help. He had to get to Tia and James, warn them before it was too late. Daniels stood over the unconscious figure of the man he had just knocked out. His breathing was heavy, his body battered from the fight, and his side still bled where the bullet had grazed him. But none of that mattered now. The man in front of him, lying on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse, was the key to everything. The truth was almost within his grasp. He felt dizzy, his vision blurring again from the loss of blood. But there was no time to waste. He fumbled for his phone in his pocket, his hands shaking. He needed to call Jenna, to tell her where he was. He couldn't risk her finding out too late. But as he scrolled through his contacts, he paused. Jenna was in danger too. His thumb hovered over her name. But then, as he looked back at the unconscious man, something clicked in his mind. The man's mask, still lying on the floor beside him, was unlike anything Daniels had seen before. There was no doubt in his mind now. This was someone high up in the chain of things. Someone who had orchestrated everything. This wasn't just a criminal syndicate. This was a full-blown conspiracy. And the people behind it weren't going to stop at anything to protect their secrets. He needed help, but he couldn't trust anyone anymore. Harris. He had already lied about too much. The authorities. What if they were in on it? No, this had to be his fight alone. He had to expose it all. Daniels stepped back and quickly scanned the rest of the room. There were scattered papers, folders full of confidential-looking documents. Some photographs were pinned to the wall, more pictures of Tia and James, and a list of names. But it was the words scribbled across the top of one document that caught his eye. Operation Shadows. His heart stopped. It was a code A cover name for something bigger, something he had never even heard of before. And it was clearly linked to the dangers surrounding Tia and James. He grabbed the papers, quickly scanning them for any clues that could lead him to the heart of the conspiracy. The names on the list were all connected to powerful people, politicians, businessmen, and law enforcement. This wasn't just an isolated case. This was a vast network, and Daniels was now a target because he was getting too close to the truth. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the warehouse, footsteps getting louder. Daniels quickly stuffed the papers into his jacket, grabbing the gun from the unconscious man's belt. His head was spinning from the blood loss, but he knew he couldn't afford to collapse now. He pressed himself against the wall, barely able to keep his balance as he waited for whoever was coming. His pulse raced as the steps grew louder, closer. Someone had followed him. A voice called out from the darkness. "Daniels, I know you're in here." It was Harris. Daniels could feel the tension rising as he steadied his grip on the gun. But as Harris entered the dimly lit warehouse, Daniels saw something that sent a chill down his spine. Harris wasn't alone. He was flanked by two other men, both armed, both looking ready for a fight. "Harris," Daniels said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What the hell is going on? Who's behind this?" Harris' face was grim, his eyes dark. "It's bigger than you think, Daniels. You're not going to walk away from this. None of us are." Daniels could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He had no choice now. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. But the cold reality was setting in. Whoever was behind this was ready to kill to keep their secret safe. "What's Operation Shadows?" Daniels demanded, his voice strained. Harris' eyes flickered with something between fear and anger, but he didn't respond. The men flanking him raised their guns, the barrels aimed straight at Daniels. "You can't stop it," Harris said, his voice cold. "You never could." But Daniels wasn't backing down. He had come too far. He wasn't going to let them silence him or anyone else. With one swift motion, he raised his gun and fired a warning shot into the air. The men flinched, but they didn't move. Harris stood still, watching him. "I'm not here to play your games," Daniels said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "I'm here for the truth, and you're going to give it to me." Harris smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You're too late." Daniels stood over the unconscious figure of the man he had just knocked out. His breathing was heavy, his body battered from the fight, and his side still bled where the bullet had grazed him. But none of that mattered now. The man in front of him, lying on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse, was the key to everything. The truth was almost within his grasp. He felt dizzy, his vision blurring again from the loss of blood. But there was no time to waste. He fumbled for his phone in his pocket, his hands shaking. He needed to call Jenna, to tell her where he was. He couldn't risk her finding out too late. But as he scrolled through his contacts, he paused. Jenna was in danger too. His thumb hovered over her name, but then, as he looked back at the unconscious man, something clicked in his mind. The man's mask, still lying on the floor beside him, was unlike anything Daniels had seen before. There was no doubt in his mind now. This was someone high up in the chain of things, someone who had orchestrated everything. This wasn't just a criminal syndicate. This was a full-blown conspiracy, and the people behind it weren't going to stop at anything to protect their secrets. He needed help, but he couldn't trust anyone anymore. Harris. He had already lied about too much. The authorities. What if they were in on it? No, this had to be his fight alone. He had to expose it all. Daniel stepped back and quickly scanned the rest of the room. There were scattered papers, folders full of confidential-looking documents. Some photographs were pinned to the wall, more pictures of Tia and James, and a list of names. But it was the words scribbled across the top of one document that caught his eye. Operation Shadows. His heart stopped. It was a code, a cover name for something bigger, something he had never even heard of before. and it was clearly linked to the danger surrounding Tia and James. He grabbed the papers, quickly scanning them for any clues that could lead him to the heart of the conspiracy. The names on the list were all connected to powerful people, politicians, businessmen, and law enforcement. This wasn't just an isolated case. This was a vast network, and Daniels was now a target because he was getting too close to the truth. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the warehouse. Footsteps, getting louder. Daniels quickly stuffed the papers into his jacket, grabbing the gun from the unconscious man's belt. His head was spinning from the blood loss, but he knew he couldn't afford to collapse now. He pressed himself against the wall, barely able to keep his balance, as he waited for whoever was coming. His pulse raced as the steps grew louder, closer. Someone had followed him. A voice called out from the darkness. "Daniels, I know you're in here." It was Harris. Daniels could feel the tension rising as he steadied his grip on the gun. But as Harris entered the dimly lit warehouse, Daniels saw something that sent a chill down his spine. Harris wasn't alone. He was flanked by two other men, both armed, both looking ready for a fight. "Harris," Daniels said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What the hell is going on? Who's behind this?" Harris' face was grim, his eyes dark. "It's bigger than you think, Daniels. You're not going to walk away from this. None of us are." Daniels could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He had no choice now. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The cold reality was setting in. Whoever was behind this was ready to kill to keep their secrets safe. "What's Operation Shadows?" Daniels demanded, his voice trained. Harris' eyes flickered with something between fear and anger, but he didn't respond. The men flanking him raised their guns, the barrels aimed straight at Daniels. "You can't stop it," Harris said, his voice cold. "You never could." But Daniels wasn't backing down. He had come too far. He wasn't going to let them silence him or anyone else. With one swift motion, he raised his gun and fired a warning shot into the air. The men flinched, but they didn't move. Harris stood still, watching him. "I'm not here to play your games," Daniels said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "I'm here for the truth, and you're going to give it to me." Harris smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You're too late."